Greg Palast comes by and talks about whether Venezuela is going to be the war that Donald Trump wants to ensure his reelection. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, and subscribe to our channel, please. But I want to start out, with our old buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author, filmmaker. His most recent, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Greg Palast, Palast.com is his website. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast. And Greg, welcome back to the program.
Buenos dias.
Buenos dias. So you personally knew Hugo Chavez and know President Maduro of Venezuela.
Yes, and I should also say that I personally know most of the major opposition leaders as well. I spent the years covering Venezuela on the ground for BBC television and the Guardian newspapers.
So you know Juan Guaido, or however you say it?
No one knew him. 80% of Venezuelans never heard of this guy when he declared himself president, but he got the one vote that counts in Venezuela. Donald Trump endorsed him, said, you declare yourself president, I'll back you up. That's the leader of the so-called opposition. We've talked about that, that here's a white guy trying to take over a nation of mestizos, which just ain't going to happen in the post Hugo Chavez, who is the Nelson Mandela of Venezuela. That ain't going to happen.
So, two questions. The first is, is Venezuela going to be Donald Trump's reelection war? He's made it very clear over the years that he believes that one of the things that presidents do and should do is have a war just before an election in order to guarantee that they get themselves reelected. Richard Nixon did it. Ronald Reagan did it. George Herbert Walker Bush did it. George W. Bush did it. And basically every Republican president in my lifetime, with the exception of Dwight Eisenhower, has done that. And in fact, I think Jimmy Carter is the only president not to have initiated any conflict during his 4 years in the White House. So
and look what happened to him.
Yeah, right, exactly. So A, is Venezuela going to be Trump's reelection war? And then B, where I want to, also go with this is how do you respond to the inevitable 1,000, 10,000 Twitter hits that say, particularly those that purport to be coming from Venezuela, that say, but people are starving. Maduro has mismanaged the government. There's actual hunger. It's a wreck down here. We need, somebody to come in and tell us how to make the trains run on time.
Well, a couple things. I don't think that Donald Trump is going to invade Venezuela because the army and the people who are armed, everyone has a gun in Venezuela, will go to the beaches. It would be like Bay of Pigs times 10,000. And one thing about the wars that Bush Sr. tried to reelect himself with is we like wars where Americans don't even get their hair messed up, let alone die miserably in a foreign nation. I don't think that an invasion.
Well, Grenada worked well for Reagan.
Except that, how many, exactly.
And the Falklands worked well for Maggie Thatcher. I mean, she was kind of the role model for Reagan.
Exactly. So you didn't have British troops, almost none die in the Falklands. The Grenada War, that was of Ronald Reagan. Well, that was like the Club Med War.
Right.
He invaded a beach resort and no Americans were hurt. Venezuela, a lot of Venezuelans, as Hugo Chavez told me, he says, I can't stand the idea of killing all these American children, but we would have to if they landed on our beaches. And he said, please, I just pray that doesn't happen. And I think that everyone who's sane feels that. Juan Guaido, the self-proclaimed president, Trump-proclaimed president, has called for American troops to come in. I mean, it's pure treason if you're a Venezuelan. Yes, are people starving there? Absolutely. By the way, one thing that I think that the President Maduro's government, where he has been untrustworthy, is that he keeps downplaying the unbelievable cost in food, medicine, suffering of the Venezuelan people caused by the lockdown embargo that was created by Donald Trump. Well, lockdown, in fact, you remember all there are estimates that maybe 500,000 Iraqis died in the embargo on Iraq, and they allowed Iraq to sell 2 million barrels of oil a day. Venezuela is not allowed to sell any oil. My reports from my people on the ground, they're telling me that they have like what they call bus cemeteries. The buses break down. There's no parts because they're brought in from abroad. They have a free subway system that was built by Chavez in Caracas that's virtually inoperative now. Think that people are suffering, but it's because of the embargo. And if you embargoed Florida in the way we've embargoed Venezuela, Florida would be imploding right now. So it's all the embargo.
So, I'm experiencing kind of a major moment of dissonance here, Greg. Here in the United States, we had hearings yesterday with Bill Barr and all this stuff and the Mueller report. And basically the bottom line of it is that the United States is really seriously pissed off that a foreign government, in this case Russia, tried to mess with our elections by putting a couple $100,000 into Facebook ads and running a troll farm and stealing emails and releasing them by WikiLeaks and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's all well documented, and we're just all very, very upset about that. Like, you can't do that. You can't mess with a democracy. You can't mess with another country. And then we go to Venezuela and we insert ourselves into their election. After the election, we insert ourselves again. I mean, this is
more than insert. We literally have Donald Trump announcing to the Venezuelan people who their president is, and they've never even heard of the guy.
Right. So, and we condemned Russia when they did this in Ukraine. Essentially, when they, when Putin came out and said, "Well, wait a minute, there's a bunch of Russian-speaking people and Russian ancestry people who live in eastern Ukraine, and we're going to help them out and defend them," and they were, sponsoring essentially a candidate for president, or several candidates for president, all that, and we condemned them. I mean, all the way up to the United Nations, we sanctioned them. We did all kinds of, we're outraged about this. And yet we're doing this in Venezuela right now. I don't understand how any politician can complain about our involvement in Russia or Russia's involvement in our elections with a straight face if they're supporting our inserting ourselves into the Venezuelan elections.
Well, if there was really a dictatorship to overthrow, I'm not friends of dictators. And we have a dictatorship in China that we've cuddled up to. In Saudi Arabia, where they chop up journalists in little pieces, and I could name.
They crucified a guy for Easter who was a dissident.
Yes, that's right.
In Saudi Arabia.
And so, we're told in Venezuela that the Maduro government is a dictatorship. They had an election. Guaido wouldn't run because he would lose. And I've been seeing nothing in the New York Times, CNN. The usual suspects, nothing but the demonstrations they're very big, that, by the way, that support Juan Guaido, the pretender that Donald Trump's choice.
Right, as you're talking, we're playing some of that drone footage that you supplied us with.
What you're seeing in the drone footage, the massive, massive demonstration, which you are going to see nowhere but on the Thom Hartmann program, that's the pro-government demonstration. There are probably 50,000 people that demonstrated against the government. That's big. By the way, they demonstrated a place called Altamira.
Against the government? You mean in favor of the government?
About 50,000 against the government. Big.
Oh, okay.
What you're seeing is about 200,000 demonstrating for the government.
I see.
And the guys in demonstrating against the government were doing so in a place called Altamira, which is the equivalent of demonstrating in Beverly Hills. Rich white people. And yet what you're seeing is a massive, massive, massive outpouring of people for the Maduro government. And I'm not saying Maduro is a wonderful guy and that everything is fine. That's not true. But but believe it or not, they don't want Donald Trump to tell them who their president will be, especially a guy that they've never heard of until Donald Trump said, "Hey, here's your president." And by the way, when we say Donald Trump, as you know, Trump wouldn't know Juan Guaido from a hole in the wall. It's John Bolton and Elliot Abrams. John Bolton is our NSA chief, and he's the guy who sold us the war in Iraq with WMDs. And guess who is backing him up? Our special envoy to Venezuela, Elliot Abrams.
Who's the guy who was convicted of crimes involved with Iran-Contra, of messing with Central American countries that took down Guatemala and Nicaragua I mean, this is why El Salvador, this is why we've got refugees on our southern border, because of Elliot Abrams' behavior that got him a criminal conviction that was pardoned by George Bush Sr. at the recommendation of Bill Barr, who was then the Attorney General.
Exactly. So what you have is convicted liars and neocon warmongers telling us that the Venezuelan people would really like us to invade them. Please don't buy this stuff. In fact, 2 days ago, the New York Times, CNN ran that there was a coup, that the military was turning against their government, and there's Juan Guaido in front of the big military base called La Carlota, and that in that military base, he said, as your commander-in-chief, I'm your commander-in-chief. It's like he might as well call himself Napoleon. He said, I order you out of your bases to take over the Venezuelan White House. And they all looked at him. No one went out there. There were a few soldiers, and I don't know if you are able to show that clip. They're yabbering in Spanish. They're all excited, really upset, a bunch of young soldiers. A few soldiers were standing near Guaido. We interviewed, my people on the ground, William Camacaro, interviewed those soldiers who were supposedly Guaido supporters, and they were saying, no, we were tricked by some guy named one of their captains, because Guaido has some supporters. They were tricked by their captains, told that they were going out on a mission and to go stand out in front of the military base. And they ran away the minute that they found out that they were just a photo op for Juan Guaido. And they're all, if you listen to these guys, I know you don't speak Spanish, or you may not, I think you speak Spanish, but most of your listeners won't. And you'll see a bunch of guys saying, my God, these guys are trying to start a civil war in our country. We don't want that.
Right.
These young guys are saying no.